Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Bibray, I'm Managing Director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are in week 48 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the news today, House impeachment managers will finish their case today against former President Donald Trump in the Senate. Salesforce has announced that most of its workforce will work remotely even after the pandemic. Today's topic is the future of work, and we are joined by an exciting panel. Frida Polli, CEO of Pymetrics, Juke Su, the CEO of Pursuit, Melissa Jazor, Eagle Hill Consulting CEO. Great to see you guys. How are you?
Doing well.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Listen, 48 weeks. We're almost up to a year. Real quick before we dive into the future of work, fill us in. How has the pandemic and these last 48 weeks been for you individually, your team, and also what you've been working on professionally? Melissa, why don't we start with you?
Sure. First off, Ken, it's a little startling to hear 48 weeks like out loud. It's crazy. But we've been fortunate. I've been fortunate. We've been fortunate. I think our team came together like a family. We've been lucky to go to 100% remote without a hitch. Of course, there have been hiccups along the way, but really been working on trying to work through those. So we're 48 weeks in and still standing.
Amazing. And Juke, how about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's been wild to hear similar reaction. 40 weeks. It seems like both a lifetime ago and not that long. This dramatic shift. Yeah, it's been kind of wild. You know, we've been really focused on our audience, our fellows, blue collar workers, primarily from communities of color. Many of them have been really deeply affected by the pandemic in terms of the job loss and tied to the businesses, those kind of industries. But, you know, I'm optimistic about the future and what may happen and us, you know, enabling kind of the talent to be repositioned and also really contribute to the hopefully future growth of our economy.
Amazing. And then Frida, how about you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, same. We've been remote now for about a year. And certainly I think, you know, what we see in the field is just an increased adoption of digital tools, whether it's, you know, artificial intelligence or digital interviewing. And I think that from our perspective, I think what's critical is that these tools really start to be more transparent about the impact that they're having, you know, particularly on communities that have been more affected by the pandemic in terms of communities of color, women, and so on. So that's kind of our big, you know, thing that we're focusing on right now.
Excellent. So Melissa, taking a step back at Eagle Hill, I mean, I love one of the quotes that you had recently, right? Like the comfort zone's a beautiful place, but nothing really grows there, right? So how's your advice? How is the work you've been providing your clients or what they've been asking for help from you on, how's that evolved over the last year, right? How is that? How have you made a kind of pivot and what are your clients thinking about it? What are they worried about and need your help on?
I think what continues to be top of mind for our clients is really, first off, just dealing with the day-to-day. I think we're still in it, right? We're still in it. So
Yep.
How do we, unfortunately, right? But how do you deal with the day-to-day of the pandemic, from everything from dealing with employee burnout to what returning to work is actually going to look like? In fact, two of the things that we've been focusing on around those things is we've been doing a lot of research around burnout specifically. Burnout continues to be a huge issue. I mean, going into this, a lot of people felt burnt out. But now that we're, again, I'm 48 weeks in, it's become even more of an issue. In fact, one of our polls found that I think it's more than half of workers feel burnt out. So 58% of workers are saying that they feel burnt out, up from 45% in the early days of the pandemic. Another thing we're finding as well around return to office is employees are split on a key issue around vaccine requirements. So our polling is finding 49% of workers believe that employers should require COVID vaccines in the workplace. So I think that's just an interesting thing that we've been really helping our clients work through. But I think the vast majority of employees agree on one thing, is that they want their employers involved in their safety around return to work. So requiring masks, social distancing, COVID testing, temperature checks, and things like that. But one thing, if I had to say one thing, is that we really have been seeing, that we've been really talking to a lot of our clients about, is that we're predicting a huge workforce turnover tsunami coming our way. And we're finding that our polling is indicating that 1 in 4 employees are planning on switching jobs as this pandemic hopefully starts to wind down and people get back to the office. So I think we've been really encouraging our clients to start paying attention to this and start planning for it now.
So Frida, how are your
Can I
clients, please?
Oh no, I was just curious. And do you have any thoughts as to why that's going to happen? What's the force behind 1 in 4 people thinking they're going to get a new job or
Great
try to get a new
question.
job? Yeah.
Yes, our belief is one of the primary things is millennials. So millennials have been and combined with burnout, right? So millennials are used to switching jobs, as we all know, but now they've been kind of sitting in place for a while. They kind of hung tight last year. I don't know about you all. We saw a dramatic reduction in turnover last year. A lot of our clients saw a dramatic reduction in work in turnover. So they've all been hanging tight, and now they're antsy. So that's the first one. And the second thing is burnout, right? Like people think the grass is greener, and that if you do the switch, maybe it'll help with the burnout.
Totally.
Interesting. So Frida, what are you seeing with your clients? How has your business evolved over the last year? And as you talk a little bit about that, drill down a little bit on some of what Melissa said, right? With how has this impacted women in particular leaving the workforce? Really disproportionately impacting women.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that we've seen is that because at least at the beginning of the pandemic, but, continuing into now, there was a considerable reduction in hiring, right? So what we've seen a lot of is companies using technology, including Pymetrics, to really understand, okay, well, so there was a reduction in hiring, but at the same time, there were very different business demands, right? So how do you put those two things together? Well, what people have really focused in on is internal mobility. So we've seen a really, really big uptick in trying to understand their current workforce better, and also moving folks around, right? Because, again, just thinking of Pymetrics, we're a small company, but the needs of the business have changed dramatically. And yet we really haven't also been, sort of on a hiring freeze as well. So that has been really fascinating and exciting to watch, because you can really tap into digital processes for those types of, moves. And in terms of how, obviously the impact on women has been, really horrible. I don't think, Ken, that we have a good sense of how we're going to come out of that and how technology can help. I mean, I think one thing technology can do is give you a better sense of, if women are dropping out, or if you're having a harder time attracting women, where in the pipeline, that's happening, because technology leaves a paper trail, right? So you can always look back and say, okay, well, where are the drop-off points and so on. So that's my hope, is that we can use technology to have more transparency around different parts of the process that are impacting all folks that have been disproportionately impacted, including women.
So elaborating on that, right, Juke, you created Pursuit. You were laser focused on kind of addressing these concerns in communities that were disadvantaged, and upward mobility and retraining for a workforce, and really kind of bridging that gap between talent and opportunity. How has Pursuit evolved, just in general over the last few years, and then really specifically now moving forward? How do you think your mission has changed? How do you kind of approach these challenges about workforce development?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, unfortunately, I think our mission is more important than ever. We're particularly focused on blue collar workers. Nearly 2/3 of Americans don't graduate from college. So thinking about that, that's the majority of Americans, and those jobs and the industries in which those roles are. There's been this trend through technology, but just a larger restructuring of our economy where those roles are under pressure. And I think we've seen that during the pandemic, whether retail, hospitality, other kind of roles. And I think, what we're hearing and seeing is not just our audience being affected in those roles, but also a lot of companies accelerating a lot of their strategies that they had before around those roles. So, I don't think it's a bad thing. Obviously, there are kind of disparate impacts on that, but what I think that means is I think we should really have more thoughtful solutions about what we should really be doing to reskill blue collar workers. It's not just affecting as individuals, but ultimately, and I think we see a disproportionate impact on, in the past year, obviously, as many businesses have, we used to do our programming all in person. We've gone online digitally. I think I'm hopeful that can actually open up more opportunities for more people. And then I think at the beginning in March and April of the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty around whether certain jobs would still be available. But we see in certain industries like technology, the economy, it's still roaring, more demand than ever. And we're really seeing employers as well look for solutions. Particularly last summer with the, magnification of, racial injustice and the awareness of that and what that presents. We really see employers looking for solutions around, how do we solve for these problems? We know there is talent, but maybe, whether blue collar workers is a non-traditional pool that you think about, and also communities of color, what that means to be successful, employers enabling that success on the job. So, I think that's in the right direction. I do think all these stakeholders are important to be able to ultimately, create the solutions to kind of make that change. I'm glad there is kind of interest. I hope that interest is not just a blip and is sustained, and that there are real kind of initiatives and solutions towards that.
So let's pivot back to you, Frida. I think some of what I've seen that you've been focused on, right? You talk a lot about the kind of soft skills of employees, right? When you think about the talent base and opportunity and increased access to opportunity, hard skills versus soft skills kind of creates a barrier, right? Like Juke is trying to address that with, increasing, experience and skill sets. But how do you advise employers to not just be superficial in their approach, right? Like this.
Totally. So, so Pymetrics uses, people's soft skills as a way to evaluate them. So soft skills are far more equitably distributed than hard skills. So you can have two people with the same exact soft skill profile raised, sort of bottom quintile, top quintile. They're going to end up with very different hard skill profiles. So soft skills, cognitive, social, and emotional aptitudes in people are a great way to equalize some of the discrepancies that we're already seeing in the workforce. And our tool is being increasingly used both by companies who want to upskill blue collar workers, like Juke is mentioning, as well as public-private partnerships that are going on. So, for example, we're helping the state of Ohio with their Ohio to Work program, and just some insanely compelling stories coming out of there. There's a woman, Lois Brown, who literally became homeless because of the pandemic, which shouldn't surprise anybody, who then went through their retraining program. And part of that is the Pymetrics assessment. And despite no background in it, found out that she was a great soft skill fit for healthcare. And now she's currently employed in healthcare. Now, granted, there was a tremendous amount of support that needed to go into that. But I think that, diminishing the discrepancies and the boundaries that we've imposed on sort of low skill and high skill workers, using other ways of assessing them, is really critical in trying to address, these societal chasms that have, only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And technology can be a really, really important way of doing that. We see other technology platforms sort of addressing the same issue and understanding, okay, this person, maybe their only background has been this, but we have to open up areas of opportunity, in particular around mobility from low to high skill occupations. Because I think, some of the numbers that you were saying where 1 in 4 people are going to change jobs, that's probably high skill workers, right? Because they are the ones that have the opportunity. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think that in sort of low skill occupations, it's a very different picture. And they don't necessarily have the flexibility and the opportunity to be job hopping. So I think when we talk about the impacts of the pandemic on employment, it's a different world if you're, have a college degree, versus don't. I think we have to have different approaches. So.
Yeah. And Melissa, I love your thoughts on this about how you're advising or how your clients are thinking about the future need for their own workforce, right? Is it about hard skills? Is there an openness to kind of evaluating how to find more diverse talent? How do you think or advise on diversity and inclusion issues, right? As you think toward the future to make your clients more competitive?
So first thing, I would definitely agree on the soft skill. I do think the soft skills are becoming more and more and more important, especially as we begin to see more and more and more automation happening. That I think that's really becomes the competitive edge, our soft skills. We definitely are seeing a huge shift to focus on diversity and inclusion. And one, if companies are not paying attention to, we strongly encourage companies to do it, because I think in a really great way. I don't think that's a blip. I don't think that's a trend. I'm feeling hopeful, like Juke is, in saying that I think this is here to stay as it should be.
Mhm.
And so I think we're really been focused on trying to help not only we're focused on it at Eagle Hill, but also our clients as well.
Interesting. Very, very cool. Juke, you're in Long Island City, right? Like you've kind of grown, built a reputation, found strategic partners. How do you think about scale, right? Like how do you take what you're doing in Long Island City, partner with tech companies, finding workers that need help, and improving your community? How do you now take that national at a time where this impact has so disproportionately affected so many Americans across the country, rural, urban, everywhere?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, we're really deeply thinking about that. We've had a really effective model. So we have a 4-year training program, taking blue collar workers on average earning $18,000 before pursuit. After about a year of training, they're earning $85,000 a year, and then 3 years of career support to try to make sure that if you're switching from low skill to high skilled, as Frida was alluding to, there's also the implementation of what that looks like and enabling that kind of support a job or any kind of job switch that takes place. We want to make sure it's a permanent change in impact there. So, but that's a long cycle. We've had this track record of success with that. And so I think now at the stage is, it's right. We would love to think about taking our model here in New York to other communities across the country. It's a complicated thing. It's what we're doing for workforce development or job training is a little bit different than just pure education, in which the training has to be effective, but we also need the employers as a customer. So, we have amazing employers as customers and clients, looking for those in other places as well as we think about expansion. But really, a large part of scale is how do you finance that? We started with all philanthropy, and we've, over the years since 2016, developed a product called Pursuit Bond through an income share agreement, which enables nonprofits and social enterprises to access capital markets in a way that the financing is tied to the outcomes of the results of the training. And money doesn't solve everything, but if you looking at the landscape in the pool of capital that goes into adult training, there's a big mismatch between the needs that everyone's been kind of talking about and actually the pool of capital that exists. So just breaking out a little bit further, in New York City, for example, the total pool of capital from foundations and corporations that go into adult workforce training, so not young adults, but anyone older than 24, which is not very old, is about $28 million a year. $2.8 million. Government's direct funds for training as well is around $30 million. There's other funds for benefits and other things, but really it's about like the training dollars for skilling. That's not a lot of money. That's also one of the wealthiest, most generous cities in the country. So what do you do in other communities where there may not be the generosity of those donors? So I think, and obviously it's not about nonprofit or for-profit. I think there are a lot of amazing for-profit models, but the vast majority of reskilling is done by nonprofits here in America in those communities. So I think solving this financing issue, and it's not just we want more people to donate, but there's a way to tie financing to the ultimate outcomes. And I think that is a big impediment to kind of scale the policies around how to enable that.
Interesting. Frida, you're in a space that's been around a long time, helping companies find talent, how to recruit them. Technology is a great thing, and it can also be a crushing thing, right? How much does technology play into recruitment? How has bias impacted the ability for folks to have opportunity and access? What are you trying to address on the technology side to make it easier for companies, but also provide more opportunity for folks that are looking for access to careers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So just to be clear, Ken, the first part of any person's application, which is typically before you get interviewed, has been basically done by technology now for several decades. I think there's just more of an awareness now that that's the case, but really winning phase. And what we're trying to do is take a phase that quite frankly was excluding a lot of people because people were using kind of keyword searches and things that were, pretty exclusive in terms of, just looking at sort of prestigious Ivy League schools and whatnot, and making it more about someone's potential for a job. So again, I think that, technology has always been there. It's about making sure that that technology is far more inclusive and proving it, right? I think there are a lot of technology layers that claim, oh, I'm bias free or I'm inclusive, I'm a D&I tool, and there's really no evidence, right? And so we're big proponents of, hey, if you're going to make these claims, have some peer reviewed evidence, have someone else come in and basically verify that you're being, through a third party audit, that you're actually doing what you say you do. Because again, I think we're kind of in this phase of, a lot of people claiming that they have these impacts, and yet not a lot of evidence. So we're pushing for more we've provided that evidence. We want others to do the same, because I think people have to regain trust that this technology is actually benefiting broadly the society that we all live in, rather than making some of the chasms we already see worse.
Interesting. So, Melissa, we've talked a little bit about the actual return to the office, right? What does that look like? How do you plan for it? How do you think about it? Talk a little bit about what you're hearing from, or what you're advising clients in terms of culture, right? In terms of like making sure you have that secret sauce, that vibe, that ecosystem, and how you think how important that is, especially in light of big companies like Salesforce saying, some workers may not even have to come back to the office, right? Like, how, as a company, how do you kind of build culture, allow for those collisions that happen, innovation? It's tough over Zoom, right? But how do you advise that? How do you think about that moving forward? Does geography even matter anymore? I mean, no pressure.
Good question. I mean, I certainly think it matters less now, right? Just like you said, Salesforce coming out and saying there's three options now. I mean, geography definitely, I think, is mattering less, and I think that's here to stay. I think we have been advising culture. I definitely think is so important as we move forward, especially as the younger generations really view it as a discriminator in terms of how they choose where they want to work, how they can get behind where they work. But I think it's about being intentional. That's probably the one downside, I think, to being so virtual, is you have to be so much more intentional about the culture you foster and the culture you create. And one of the things we continually recommend is making sure it's part of your leadership agenda. Like, is it something you're regularly talking about? Is it something you're regularly addressing? Because if you don't, it will just happen around you, versus actually taking steps to be thoughtful about how you want it to evolve and happen at your own organization.
No, totally interesting. How do you all think about just labor in general and labor force issues and some of these challenges companies are going to face with finding talent? I mean, Juke, is this an opportunity or not for companies to be looking beyond a kind of certain geography? Is that an opportunity for blue collar workers in rural areas that maybe never had access to some of the companies that you have as partners? I mean, how do you think about that type of reach and using technology to allow for it? Or do you have
I do think
ground in a community, right? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it is an opportunity, but it'll take a time to play out. I think in terms of remote access to work, that's huge. But I think the idea of communities and these pools of talent that stays within those kind of communities are also important, and what that reskilling looks like. Because we can talk about match. I mean, I guess it depends on what's one thesis around the labor market. Right. There is, if you're high skilled, there's never a better time to be, and in certain industries, right. There's lots of opportunity, lots of demand. So is it a matching problem, supply and demand problem, or is there actually different fragmented parts of the market, both geography, but also in terms
Yep.
of skill sets, right? And what that means. And I think, I know Frida's done a lot of work on that and thinking about that. And also how to select and what are the lens in which employers are able to actually do that, because we use signals. A lot of hiring is not actually around skills. It's around these signals of your success or pedigree or et cetera as well. So, it does present this opportunity because you can access talent pool anywhere. But I do think that a lot of it is also about the skills training and enablement so that a lot of the labor market could get to middle or high skilled.
Yep.
And then also the ability for employers to identify skills and select, or else even if we move everyone to higher skills, but a person still, has the background of, working in a warehouse and the resume may not stand out and you may never be hired, even if you have all the capabilities used to. So it's a complicated problem, but I do think the ability to work remotely does enable geographic, obviously, talent pools to be uncovered, which is dramatic. And I think I hope there's a way to do that well, and so that more communities can be impacted.
Yep. And can I just make a comment? I mean, I completely agree with what GK says. And I think, look, it is a combination of matching problem plus actual skills gaps, right? So that it's not one or the other. But I think we have to fix the matching problem as much as we have to fix the skills problem, because the whole point of, a soft skill platform like ours is to say, look, I know this person has never done this job, but they have the ability. And there's tons of research that shows if you have sort of the inherent capability for something, you are far more easily trained. You are far more likely to be successful in that role, right? And so I think they are different problems, and there's no denying that there's also a training gap and whatnot, but we can't fix that training gap until we also start to fix the matching gap, because otherwise right now, I think we're in a situation where so many people are like, oh, it's a talent war. And, platforms like LinkedIn make it so easy to just go poach somebody who's already employed, as opposed to like, hey, let's find someone who does, who maybe is underemployed or needs a job, rather than just recycling the same talent over and over again. Right. And I think it's sort of a lazy thing to do. Say there's a talent war and we're just gonna, poach Frida Polly, who already has a job, who by the way gets ads on LinkedIn for jobs all the time. And I'm like, I'm running a company, I don't need them. As opposed to like, folks that, really would benefit tremendously from that opportunity. So again, I think there are two parts of the problem. We need to fix both, but I think we're under aware or under focusing on the matching problem and over focusing on the skills gap. So.
So we had a couple questions come in and about worker rights, right? If employers now, geography doesn't matter, and they can kind of, blank canvas and they can search around the country and they have all the leverage, right? So how do you think about policy adjustments that we need to make as a country as it relates to labor issues, worker rights, protections? Have you thought about all of that kind of stuff? Because things are moving so quickly. Like how do we address some of these things from a policy perspective? And open to anybody.
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think that there are going to be, there's already pressure now, and I think it's rightfully so, to include more worker voice in some of these decisions and some of these platforms and so on, right? Because I think, again, we've come to a point where there's such a tremendous amount of imbalance between, the worker and, like capital and labor, basically, and that does need to be corrected on some front. How we go about doing that, I think I'm not an expert. I think there are different solutions to this, but I think that that issue does need to be addressed. So,
I think it's segmented also, really, as well. Like again, maybe, and I haven't thought about this enough. Between high skilled and low skilled workers, the relationship and your rights are very different with your employer. Whereas high skilled workers, again, are highly mobile.
Yep.
And you can see whether stances by Facebook or Google, et cetera, about their policies actually is because of how mobile their employee base is. And so I think it's fragmented. Whereas if you're less skilled, and labor rights apply across the board, but I think maybe what we're thinking about also is there's less power in that kind of relationship. Part of it's because what's the demand there and what happens. So, I think the experience is not uniform. I would say obviously across states as well, right? Going back to your point kind of around, and I guess this conversation on what it means digital, what is national policy versus state by state policy? We see, so much labor mobility, right? I'm in here in New York, love New York forever, but a lot of people, whether temporary or permanently moving, and we see in San Francisco and all these other kind of communities going to Texas or Florida or wherever, at least in TAC, right? And that raises a number of things, right? About what that means. There are obviously different labor laws in different places. A lot of this motivated by tax and other kind of reasons also, right? Is there uniformity around this? Like I do believe in the federal system and the Constitution, but I think, it's sometimes it's not so clear anymore where you're located and how you're working. And I think, that has huge implications on kind of the workforce. So.
Oh, and Melissa, let's talk about this, right? Like we've met some of your colleagues who I don't think you've ever even met in person, right? Like this has gone on so long that certain companies have literally maybe doubled in size, but physically never met some of their own colleagues. Like it's like crazy, right? Like what have you heard? What do you see? How are you onboarding people? How are companies creating culture, community? I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, it is wild. We have like a running joke at Eagle Hill that a couple of people who we've never met before in person keep saying, am I part of the Truman Show? I'm not part of the Truman Show, right? So you're right. I think it really focuses back on this culture thing, is really making sure that you've got the right culture in place that facilitates the right onboarding of folks, that you're welcoming them into a culture, despite the fact you've never met in person. How do you build that trust over Zoom, over Teams, to make sure that you're creating those connections human to human, even though you're not actually face to face, I think has really become a really big focus of ours and of our clients as well.
And Ken, can I just jump on that? Because I think that there has been a growing distrust of technology, right? Which I think, rightly so. There've been a lot of, examples of negative instances. I do think the pandemic has softened that to some extent, because we've all become reliant on Zoom and other forms of technology. And we've sort of realized, okay, there are these negative externalities that we need to address. However, it can also there is a positive element to it, right? So I think on some level, this necessity that we've had to all realize that without technology, we couldn't actually do our jobs, and that it does facilitate human-to-human connection, just like Melissa was saying, can be sort of a countervailing force to some of the other, sort of narratives and wins that are out there that I think is positive.
No, it's fascinating. So, this has been obviously a very depressing year, obviously with the death count as high as it has been, the concerns about unemployment, about the economy, about racial social justice issues. I mean, this has just been a lot, I think, for everyone. But with these talks, we always try to find a silver lining and be optimistic and kind of share some kind of positive outlook. I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you think? What gets you out of bed every day that you think better days are ahead? What are you optimistic about, if anything, moving forward? Maybe Melissa, we'll start with you and just go around.
Yeah, perfect. The first thing I would say is I do believe we've seen a shift in businesses taking more of a role in social justice, and I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. And I'm actually very excited about that and very hopeful for the future because of that. I'd also say, similar to what we're talking about here with technology, is it taught us all very quickly, we can do this. We can do this. And I do believe how we work day to day will not ever go back. I don't want to go back. And I think that, I think from those things, we are going to take, hopefully, some really positive things out of something that has been pretty horrible, pretty awful. And I think we all hope 2021 was off to a better start. Maybe not so much. So perhaps we're just going to focus on the future and take the best that we can with us.
That's great.
I'm generally optimistic. I agree. Like, I think there's a lot of recognition among employers about their role in society, and I think that's really incredibly important. I mean, but pointing back specifically on the COVID pandemic, this is, I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, lots of challenges, obviously, but the idea of just a vaccine and the time period by which it happened, it's such an extraordinarily human feat and innovation. And I think no matter what happens, I mean, I hope, we have a successful rollout, everyone takes it, there's not these crazy strains, but I think that is pretty incredible. And that makes me optimistic about what may happen in the future. I think previously, the quickest vaccine was 4 years, I think, for forever to be completed. So within a year, and I think it's a fundamentally stepwise change from my understanding about how these vaccines are working in the past. So I think in terms of just other diseases and what may happen, I think that's incredibly optimistic for the long term for us as a society and as a human race. So that is something I want to be optimistic about for the long term.
That's great. Frida?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo what everyone said, specifically around sort of social justice and equity. I think that is now a focus, and I don't think it will end after, everything goes back to normal, whenever that is. I also just think that, the increase, and again, speaking of white collar workers, the flexibility that has really been allowed through the pandemic. I think, as a working parent, I have 3 kids. I think the ability to be far more flexible, the fact that I'm not traveling, every week, I'm not on a plane, I think is so, the flexibility is amazing, not to mention sort of the impact on, my carbon footprint has improved tremendously. So I think all of these trends, whether, it's reducing carbon footprint, whether it's being more flexible, whether it's having more focus on racial equity, are here to stay. And that makes me very optimistic. And, counterbalancing that with the fact that, we've got some pretty big challenges ahead of us. So we have to, we can't sort of let, the business needs this, we have to throw all these things aside. I think we can't do that. I don't think we will, but I don't think we can, because I think what we've learned is that those two things are not incompatible, and actually, focusing on these sort of more social things can actually help business run in a much more effective way. So that's kind of my sense of optimism.
Well, one last quick question just for workers out there, right? There is a lot of transition. People are looking for new opportunities, looking at what new skills they should be seeking and pursuing. They want to find out how to get employers. What advice do you have for people out there who are trying to figure out how to best position themselves, use technology, and find what's the next appropriate step for them career-wise? Now, maybe we'll do round robin backwards with Frida first.
Sure. So I always think that you need to figure out what excites you. So if you find something that you're really passionate about and excited about, that is going to motivate you in the long term, and I would focus on that rather than hopping on, the latest trend. So that's my advice.
Beautiful. Juke?
I think the motivation is incredibly important. If it's about getting a job in this time and thinking about it, it's odd. Like hiring and talent markets, it's odd. This is probably very obvious, but the skills is important, matching is important, network super important. I think nothing beats just talking to as many people as possible and just like getting at it, and I think the benefit of the digital environment is that it's in many ways much easier to do that. You can hop on a call with someone for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it's much easier to kind of tap into different networks to find the best opportunity that would be best suited to you. And I think that is a good thing.
Beautiful. Melissa?
I think I would probably say to focus on keep your eye on the long term, and building skills and focus on the long, more money or whatnot, but really focus on where you want to go and what's going to get you there. And sometimes patience is required to do that. So
excellent. Well, it's so fun talking to all 3 of you, whether it's covering the training efforts that UK is making, or Melissa, the advice and guidance you're giving companies, or what you're hearing from them, to Frida, the innovation you're trying to do to kind of demystify and kind of identify a process to identify and find these soft skills and talent and level the playing field. I think it just all ties together so well. And, this is an important topic, and I'm so grateful to all 3 of you for being on today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken.
Thank you.
Listen, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Our next Coffee with Ken is going to be next Thursday. We're going to be talking about expanding access to venture capital dollars. In the meantime, please practice social distancing, wear a mask, and wash your hands. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.